So as we take a deep breath, we just continue on our journey of relentless expectancy. And we have been relentlessly relentless all month dealing with expectancy. And I wish I could see a show of hands, just so people who've been practicing expectancy, who have really been living expectancy, living in expectancy, and just being in that place of the expectancy of good always as we walk through our lives, as we walk through these days. It is such a wonderful, wonderful place to be. There's so much power in it. There's so much power in it. That's what I've been talking about all month, about the power and expectancy, and encouraging you to use the affirmation that something wonderful is happening in my life right now. I know it, I sense it, I feel it, I expect it, and I thank God for it. And just keeping that affirmation fresh in our minds and fresh on our lips and fresh in our hearts as we go through our days, just recognizing that expectancy is about more, and that we're always about more, always about more. It's the big and, always about expecting more good, expecting more good. And I had a couple of people send me text messages this past week, about experiences they had with expectancy and wonderful results they've had with expectancy. And then I had an email from someone and another text message from someone who was talking about the disappointments that they'd had this week. And I just remind you that when you're dealing with this, when you're experiencing disappointment, you're probably dealing with expectations. You're probably dealing with expectations. You were expecting a particular result. You were expecting particular good to come, if not a particular good, certainly to come in a particular way. And God doesn't work in the particular. God doesn't work in the particular, and that's what we need to keep in mind. So if you're experiencing disappointment, just release it. Just take a deep breath, just let it go, and be willing to just be open to allowing the good to show up in your life, to show up any way it does, however God wants to show up, just allowing that to happen. That's what expectancy is all about, because we know that, then that takes me into today's topic. We know that spirit withholds nothing from us. Spirit withholds nothing from us. God is always giving. That givingness of God just is. God is always giving of itself. God is always being itself, and being itself is the fullness and the allness of givingness. Everything that we could possibly need or desire, God has already given just by being God. And when we can tap into that, then we can recognize that God withholds nothing from us. God withholds nothing from us. I picked up something from Ernest Holmes the other day, and I can't remember what it was now, but the first sentence was, God limits no one. God limits no one. No one. So God does not limit us. God does not withhold from us. God just gives and gives and gives, and it just is itself. And we have to stay in alignment with that, so that we can experience the givingness that already is. We can experience that fully and completely. That's our role, is to experience fully and completely the goodness that is God and that has already been given, so that we get to experience a full life, and we get to experience all the good that we desire. We get to experience all the good that is available to us. And the thing for us to do is just to expect it, just to expect it and be open to it. In one of his essays in the Living the Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes talks about a beautiful valley in the Colorado Rockies, that just where fountains just gush forth, and that each fountain is different, and there's more water that comes out of some than out of others, but they all are. The water comes from, the water comes from one body of water, that's at a deep subterranean level, and it has this pressure that just pushes the water forward into each fountain, according to whatever opening there is in each fountain, according to whatever availability there is in each fountain. And Holmes says that we are each fountains of life, that we should compare, we should analogize this and look at ourselves and look at those fountains as our own natures, that we are each individual fountains. And there's that body of water behind us that is just coming forth with all kinds of pressure to be expressed, That takes it to a different level of what Emerson says about us being inlets and outlets for the presence of God. And so if we're going to be inlets for the presence of God, we know that we're that just because that's established since before the beginning, that we're inlets for the presence of God. And Holmes says that we have to make a conscious decision to become outlets for that presence of God, to be that place and space through which God can express. And so just thinking of ourselves as fountains, we are each different. But keeping in mind, if we want to personalize those fountains, as he says, we don't want to think of a fountain, or do we think of a fountain as saying, well, that one has more water than I do. And that's because that one has more opportunities than I've had. Being jealous of one fountain having more water than the other one, or feeling like, well, God just doesn't want me to have any more water now. Fountains don't do that. And we don't have to do that either. All we have to do is just to be open, to be that place and space that we can be an outlet, because that body of water behind the fountains is not withholding anything. It's just flowing. It's just flowing. It's just flowing. It's just flowing. And it's always seeking a place. If you think about water that starts to move, water is always seeking an outlet. Water is always seeking a place. And if it runs into a place that's where there's a dam, or where there's a block, it seeps around until it finds another opening, because water is always seeking to flow. And that's how spirit is. Spirit is always seeking to flow. Spirit is always seeking to express. It's never withholding. It's never withholding. And so the thing for us to keep in mind is to look at where it is that there may be a block, because that's what stops water from flowing. Some kind of block of some kind. Some kind of block of some kind. Let's take a breath together. If you think about watering your lawn with a hose, or washing your car with a hose or whatever, but using a hose, and the water's coming out just fine. And if all of a sudden the water stops flowing, then you don't think, well, God doesn't want me to have any more water, or you don't think that's all the water I can have right now, or there's something wrong. What you do is you go and you look at the hose and you see if there's a crook in it, or you go and see if there's something blocking it in some way, or you go and see if there's something that would hinder or block the flow of it in some way. And that's the way it is in our own individual lives. When there's not that flow, when there's not that flow of good into our lives, that flow that we are expecting, that flow that we are open to having happen, when that's not happening, then it's time for us to look within. It's time for us to look at ourselves. It's time for us to look at, where am I blocking this? Where am I blocking this flow of God, of good in my life? Where am I blocking? Where am I hindering? How am I encumbering the flow of pure spirit in my life? Because it's always flowing, and it's always seeking to flow through me, to the degree that I'm open to it. And so that's what I'm inviting us to do today, to view ourselves as fountains, those fountains, and just being that fountain that's open and available for the free flow of spirit in and through and as our lives. And that's a wonderful place to be. And then expect the flow. Do what we do, and then expect that flow to happen. Expect to be that outlet. And that's the place that we want to be in. So I'm going to encourage you to do 2 or 3 things, as I usually do, have 2 or 3 things for you to do and think about throughout the week, as we move into that awareness that God withholds nothing from us. God withholds nothing from us. God withholds nothing from us. Keep that in mind. God withholds nothing from us. If we're not experiencing the good that we desire, if we're not experiencing whatever it is that we desire in our lives, God is not withholding anything. Keeping that in mind. And then making a commitment to yourself to be a daily living example. Be a daily living example of the goodness of God. Be a daily living example of the goodness of God. Make that commitment to yourself to be a daily living example of the goodness of God. And then you have to ask yourself, how can I do that? How can I be in this moment an example of the goodness of God, a living example of the goodness of God? Well, the way we do that is to move into alignment with God qualities. We move into alignment with those qualities that of God, and then we qualities of God, and then we live those qualities in whatever experience we find ourselves, in whatever situation or circumstance we find ourselves. This is how we move into that place of being a living example of the goodness of God. You know, I heard someone on TV say this yesterday, that the pandemic has left a deep psychological wound in humankind, a deep psychological wound, the isolation, the veering away from what we consider to be normalcy, not having a normal life, being isolated from each other, having to change everything that we do. The way we live our lives, the way we go about our days has been a deep psychological wound. And you know, I would not have used that term. I would not have even thought of that term. But it really struck me when I heard that. And I started to think about how the pandemic, how these last 14, 15 months have affected everybody, how they've affected everybody. And everybody has been affected in some way, impacted in some way, some, of course, differently than others according to our own individuality. But we've all been affected by it. And now all of a sudden, things are beginning to feel like they are opening up more. There are fewer restrictions. There will be a return to not, well, some people are saying a return to normalcy, but returning to life, returning to regular life, returning to connecting with each other, seeing each other, going out more, being around other people more. And you know what? That feels pretty scary to some people. That feels pretty scary to some people because there's a big difference. There's a big thing that has happened over the last 15 months, over the last time that we've been away from each other, just with our community, but in the world at large. People have had to live so differently, and everybody's been impacted by it. So now we're expected to go back out and do the things that we were doing before. And some people are saying they don't have to socially distance any longer. They don't have to wear masks any longer. And there's a lot of conflict about that. There's a lot of concern about that among some people. There are the people who want to wear masks, and there are other people who don't want to wear them. And there are those who are saying, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just take one with me. And I heard a commentator on TV yesterday saying that he was the way to wear the mask is to wear it on your wrist, kind of like a bouquet. And then if you're around somebody, you feel like you need to put it on, or they want you to put it on, then you can just take it off and put it on then. But the point is, there's so much that we have to learn about each other. There's so much that we have to learn about coming together again and being in community again. There's so much we have to learn just about going to the grocery store again, or going to the drugstore again, or going to the park again, or going to get your car serviced again. There's so many things to learn. There's so many things to adjust to. There's so many things to adapt to. There's so many ways that people are reacting and responding and acting and responding, that we have to really be prepared for all kinds of things. And the best way we can be prepared is to be anchored and to be centered in the power and the presence of God. And to know that that power and that presence is always with us, and to walk in that power and walk in that presence and walk in that love of God. And this is how we get to practice and be a living daily example of the goodness of God. Because if we leave our houses, we leave our homes anchored in and centered in God, we are centered in love. We're centered in compassion. We're centered in forgiveness. We're centered in openness, open-heartedness. We're centered in patience. Oh my goodness, do we need patience? We're centered in patience. We're centered in acceptance. We're centered in all those qualities of God, those qualities of good. And when we are anchored and centered in those, we walk forward into our day, walk forward into the world, clothed in the qualities of God. And when we are, that's how we interact, and that's how we react and respond to other people. And so we walk out with the expectancy of good. We walk out with the expectancy of good. We walk out with the expectancy of good, and we move through these next few days, these next few months, as things ease up with the expectancy of good and clothed in God qualities. Clothed in God qualities, because that's how we become that example of the goodness of God, because we allow that goodness of God to just exude from us. It just bubbles up from us. And it touches everybody with whom we come in contact as we walk forward. It touches everybody with whom we come in contact. And that is so important, because that's how we change our world. That's how we change our experiences. That's how we allow the goodness of God to spring forth. That's how we allow ourselves as fountains to be outlets for the goodness of God, for that free flow of spirit, by just being more mindful as we go forth into these next few weeks, these next few months. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how things are going to unfold. We never have, but we always thought we did. But we really don't know how things are unfolding, how things are going to happen. And so the thing for us to do is to be anchored in pure spirit, to be anchored in the intention to be a living example of the goodness of God. And when we're anchored in that, then we walk forward and allow that goodness to precede us. Allow it to precede us. And it touches everybody with whom we come in contact. And so I invite you to make that commitment to yourself, to allow the goodness of God to be the example that you're living each and every day. That means that you have to let go of judgment. That means you have to let go of blame. That means you have to let go of criticism, and that's for yourself and for others. That means that we have to just be open and just be available and expect the best when we go out and interact with other people. And I really stress this because we are going to be interacting more, and it's going to be sort of interesting to see how that unfolds. And it's really up to us to allow it to unfold easily and lovingly and compassionately through and patiently through each of us as we go back out into the world. And so let's take another breath. Yeah. And so the next thing I want us to do is to make sure that we keep the passageway of our thoughts clear. Make sure that we keep the passageway of our thoughts clear. That's an Ernest Holmes term. Keep the passageway of our thoughts clear. And we do that. Holmes says that we keep in mind that the creative law is like a mirror, and the thoughts that we think into it are like an image, and that mirror reflects back to us the image that's before it. And so whatever it is we're thinking, that mirror, the law reflects back to us what we're thinking into it. What we're thinking into is what's being reflected back to us. It's not that if we're thinking into it lack and limitation, and we're not experiencing the good that we desire, it's not that God is withholding it. It's just that we aren't in alignment with it. We aren't thinking into that image. That image is the thought. We're not thinking into that mirror, that which we desire. We're not in that place of expectancy. So make sure that the passageway of your thoughts are clear. Make sure that the passageway of your thoughts are clear. That means we have to be present. We have to be mindful. We have to walk through each and every moment of each and every day, awake and aware and fully present. And sometimes that's not always easy, but it's doable. It's simple. Just to set your intention to just take a breath and come back. Because every time we consciously take a breath, it brings us back to our center. It brings us back to being mindful. And that's the important thing for us to do, and keeping our thoughts clear. What am I thinking? The passageway of our thoughts clear. And one of the things that helps with that, of course, as I always say, as with everything, is deepening in our spiritual practice. I can't say that enough. And I say it over and over again in every way that I know how to say it in English. That's the only language I speak. And deepening in your spiritual practice, deepening in your spiritual practice, deepening in our spiritual practice. It's so important for us to do that. And, this reminds me of a Marianne Williamson quote from the book, The Gift of Change, where she says that when we meditate, sometimes, but not all the time, then we think that God helps us sometimes, but not all times. When we pray and meditate some days, but not all days, then we get to feel the peace of God some days, but not all days. When we only go to God when we are in trouble, then God's help seems inconsistent when the inconsistency really lies in us. The more time we spend with God, the more we develop our spiritual musculature, and the better and stronger we are in dealing with daily challenges. And so just remember, when we meditate, some days, but not sometimes, but not all the time, we we're not with God all the time. When we meditate sometimes and not all the time, we tend to think that God helps us sometimes and not all the time. When we pray and meditate, some days and not all days, we feel that peace of God some days, but not all days. And what we want to do is to develop that spiritual musculature so that we are stronger in our ability to deal with the challenges that come up. And we recognize that that power and that presence of God is always with us wherever we go, whatever we do. That is the thing for us to keep in mind. And so as we move through this time, making sure that we keep these things in mind. And the third thing that I'd like you to keep in mind is to just know that God never fails. Know that God never fails. Know that God never fails. That same God, that same power and presence that was available to Jesus over 2,000 years ago, that same power and presence that Jesus used over 2,000 years ago is the same power and presence that we have today. The same God that we have today. Jesus knew that there was a power in the universe that was greater than he that he could use. And he used it. That's what we know in religious science. There's a power for good in the universe and we can use it. And Jesus also knew that there's a power for good in the universe that can use us. And that's what he allowed to happen. And that's what we know, that there's a power for good in the universe and it can use each one of us. And so just keeping in mind that God never fails. And I thought of that little affirmation for you, if you will. And I invite you to use it as an affirmation. Because when I first got involved in religious science, when I was first introduced, two books that I remember reading first, and one of them was Life is for Living, that we talked about some months ago. And the other one was a little book called God Never Fails, by a minister by the name of Mary Kupferl, and she was a unity minister. And I read that book and it changed my life when I read that book, because she just talked about the many ways that we can affirm and know that God never fails. No matter what's going on in our lives, no matter what we may be experiencing, no matter what we may be up against, no matter how much doubt and fear we may be experiencing, if we will apply that one little affirmation to that, God never fails. And then know that God never fails. Believe that God never fails. And walk in that belief that God never fails. Then that's when our expectancy really takes off. Because if we believe that God never fails, then we expect to have the guidance that we are seeking. We expect to have the abundance that we are seeking. We expect to have the health that we pray for. We expect to have our prayers answered. We expect to have all the good. We expect to have all the goodness of God in our lives. And so, if, as Ernest Holmes says, expectancy speeds progress, I'm saying to you, allow expectancy to fuel your motivation. Allow expectancy to fuel your motivation. Allow expectancy to fuel the motivation to be expectant, to practice expectancy. Allow expectancy to fuel your motivation to walk in the presence of God always, to walk with God always, and to allow God to have free flow in your life always. And so I invite you today to remember that God never fails. And when we remember that God never fails, we know that God never withholds anything from us. That God is always giving of itself. God is always being itself. God is always being the allness and the fullness of itself. And it's always giving to itself, of itself to itself, always giving of itself to us, itself. God is always giving of itself. And what we have to do is be receivers. Be receivers, as the reading said. There's that divine givingness, and we have to provide the divine receivingness so that the circle is complete. We provide the divine receivingness, and we do that just by being expectant, practicing expectancy, saying, yes, God, thank you. Practicing expectancy, yes, God, thank you. So I'm going to invite you right now to just take a breath with me. Take a breath with me. And let's just move into prayer. Let's just move into that place of knowing and sensing and feeling God's presence. Let's just move into that place of knowing that there's but one life, that there's but one mind, there's but one power, there's but one presence. Let's just move into that place of knowing that that one power, that one presence, that one life, that one breath, that one is God. And that one is always giving of itself. That one is always being itself. And that one is always giving, always being, always giving, one and the same. And that one is my life. That one is the life of each of us here at this day. And so just knowing this truth, I speak the word for each of us this day. Just knowing that the givenness of God, the goodness of God is revealing itself in and through and as each life. That allness and that fullness of God is showing up in each life as perfect healing in every area of our lives. Healing in the body temple, healing in our bodies of affairs, healing of any sense of lack, any appearance of lack, any appearance of anything that's unlike that allness and that fullness and that perfection that is God. And so I'm just speaking a word for each of us to release and let go of anything that would block. We release and let go of the fear. We release and let go of the doubt. We release and let go of the criticism and the judgment and the blame and the anger and all of that stuff that we hold on to. We release it, we let it go. And as we release and let it go, then we have a space created for the free flow of spirit in our lives. We are each that fountain of life that is open and available for that free flow of spirit, that givingness of God to appear in and through and as our lives. And so I know that anywhere that there's healing needed, God is in the midst of everything that's going on in the body temple, in the bodies of affairs, in relationships, in every aspect of our lives. God is just there, being God, being God. And that radiant healing presence of God is healing everything that needs to be healed. And so I just give great thanks as I pause momentarily for anyone to speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may do that silently or loud, but you may do that now. And so for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I know that God is in the midst of every situation, every circumstance, everything. God is in the midst of everything that's going on everywhere. And that everything is made new by this radiant healing presence of God. This word goes out to our government officials, our politicians who are making decisions and knowing that decisions are being made for the highest and best for all concerned. There's a release of judgment. There's a release of divisiveness. There's a release of anything that's unlike oneness, unlike unity. There's a release of a sense of separation as we come together in love, in light, in peace, in harmony, in joy, in balance. We come together in God. We come together in God. And I know that peace is established everywhere. In the Middle East, peace remains, peace is. In this country, peace is, harmony is, love is, balance is, God is. For those who've lost loved ones, comfort is, peace of mind is, because God is. And this is the truth that we always know, that God is. And where God is, all is whole, all is perfect, all is complete. This is a truth that I know. I give great, great thanks for the word spoken here this day as it goes out to anyone on this planet needing a prayer this day, knowing that in the midst of everything, God is, and all is well. And so I simply say thank you, Father, Mother God, for the word spoken here this day, for the perfect manifestation of this word. I say thank you. I know that all is well, for I know that all is God. And I simply allow it to be. And so it is.